Welcome, everyone. As people trickle in, we'll get started in just a minute. Thank you so much for joining us for today's conversation. More people will continue to roll in, but just wanted to start off by saying thank you so much for joining today's CEO Roundtable. A few reminders before we get started. You are encouraged to introduce yourself in the chat and rename yourself with your name and organization in the participant list. We would love to see where you're calling in from. If you have any technical difficulties, please feel free to direct message myself or our council staff here to support. Throughout today's conversation, we are encouraging you to participate by putting your thoughts, questions into the chat and engage, and we are curious to hear what resonates with you. As a reminder, today's event is being recorded and it will be shared with participants alongside the resources that are shared today. The setting for Zoom subtitles or live transcript is available at the bottom of your screen. If you have any trouble getting that setting set up, please reach out. And with that, we just want to thank CEONet for their continued partnership, and I will hand it over to today's moderator, Shelly.
Thank you very much, Melissa, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. I also would like to express my thanks to the CEONet for putting these kinds of conversations together. Hopefully you have joined previous conversations. If you haven't, I really encourage you to, even if it's not a topic that's necessarily pertinent to you right now, it may be in the future, and it's just great to connect with our peers around the country. And also thanks to the Council on Foundation for making this happen. So obviously we had great interest in this topic. We've all seen the news ecosystems in our own communities and across the country really change and shift over the last few years. Our outlets are facing really unprecedented pressures with declining revenues and the increased complexity of what a newsroom is expected to do. It's no longer the paper and you read it with your cup of coffee in the morning. There's digital and text and every other form of delivery. Journalism is truly, I believe this personally, our foundation in Wichita is involved in this, and I know many of you are looking at it or have already done some funding in this area, but I really believe that community foundations can play a huge role in this, and that strong news and information is really critical to the future of our democracy. And sometimes people roll their eyes when you think of that, but I love the Washington Post tagline, which is "Democracy dies in darkness." And that's why it's critical that we have access and our citizens have access to this kind of information. Community foundations are really stepping into this area. In 2020, 56 community foundations contributed to newsrooms, and this is according to Report for America. You may be familiar with that organization. That's an increase of 124% from just the previous year when 25 foundations involved in funding in 2019. Community foundations are becoming increasingly creative in the structures that we can harness as we gain interest from our communities in this really, really long play, which is what news and information is. So we hope this conversation inspires you and informs you, and you'll get a lot of great contacts to follow up with for other people on your team as you want to learn more about this, as we support our communities with news in these really innovative ways. And today I'm joined with three of my peers: Lisa Adkins, President and CEO of the Bluegrass Community Foundation; Dale Robinson Anglin, who is Vice President for Programs at the Cleveland Foundation; and Allison Taylor Levine, Vice President for Marketing and Communications at the Delaware Community Foundation. And Allison is also the president and founder of the Local Journalism Initiative of Delaware. So people from around the country and involved in various ways in their foundations and their communities. So I want to start this conversation. Is this a role a community foundation should apply? We'll start up high and then go down lower through as we chat. Is this a role that community foundations should be involved in, and why? And we'll just start with Lisa.
Thanks, Shelly. And again, welcome to everybody. I think news and information is something that community foundations can and should be involved in. And Shelly, for the very same reasons that you articulated, we believe it's really critical just to the quality of life every day in the communities we serve. But absolutely, it's a critical part of keeping a strong democracy in this country. And so for us, our mission is really focused on creating more generous, vibrant, engaged, and equitable community. And we feel that funding and focus in this area, and it's far more than funding, by the way, it's about partnership and collaboration and attention and funding. But we agree with you that this is an area where community foundations definitely have a role.
Thank you. And Dale from Cleveland, tell us why you've gotten involved.
Similar reasons, and I would just add that I think what we saw in Cleveland was that over time, as we were asking our community to step up and try to support them in any issue, public safety, homelessness, pick an issue, it just came out that they weren't always getting the right information that they needed to make quality of life daily decisions. And partly that was because legacy media wasn't covering that. We had a number of people in our community who had never seen themselves in the local media landscape. It was not their community, and their stories were never represented. And so when we saw that all the data that has come out over the last 5 or 10 years about what happens when you don't have good local information, right? People fill that in with misinformation. There's a vacuum of information. People don't know how to make decisions. We just saw that information and news became an incredible tool. And if that's one of the tools that our community needs, then we had to figure out a way to invest in that. The question was just a how, not should you. The question is at what level, for how long, with what partners. Once we figured out that we should do it, it was just those levels of questions that happened. It became very clear to us very quickly, once you talk to your community, that there was something missing, and this was one of the things that was missing.
Allison, tell us what you have going on in Delaware.
Yeah, and I'd love to touch on that first question too, if I can, Shelly. It just, building on what Lisa and Dale have said, we've done some research in Delaware. We did a statewide ecosystem assessment that we published in June. And what we learned from our communities is that they really want and need more and better quality local news and information. And they told us this very directly, and they need it for 3 key reasons that I think really align with the goals and values and the missions of community foundations. They need information to have better access to resources to be able to function in their daily lives. Things like, when do I register my kid for school, and when is that ramp opening on I-95 again? Things so that they can just get around in their communities, in their daily lives. They also told us very clearly that they really need better local news and information to build social connection and social capital, and to strengthen their sense of place. And if there's anything that a community foundation is about, I think that's what we're about. They're looking for information about ways to connect to other people, whether that's by, when is the Memorial Day parade? How do I get involved in volunteer activities? Who is this new group of people that's moving in to the neighborhood who don't look like me, who I don't know and don't understand, and I want to know more about them so that I can build empathy and understand why they're part of my community and how we all fit together. So those are 2 big reasons. And the third reason that we heard loud and clear was they want to participate in our democracy. They want to engage in our communities, and they need access to information in order to participate through civic engagement. And all of that, to me, speaks to the role of local news and information in advancing equity in our communities, because there's little that's more important in a democracy than equity of opportunity. And I think that those are all key values and goals of community foundations. So I think that really speaks to, a lot of people will ask me, why should a community foundation care about local news and information? And I just don't see how we can't care about local news and information, And we also, as community foundations, a lot of us have specific issue areas that we focus on. And I'm just loving this line that the head of the Knight Foundation has been touting for a while now, is whatever the issue is that you're most passionate about, your second issue should be journalism. Because whether you're finding out about your care about education or the environment or workforce development, all of that stuff, I was talking to a foundation leader yesterday. He said, we really care about gun violence because we keep reading about it in the paper. I said, that's exactly why you should be interested in supporting local news and information, because you're reading about it in the paper. But if you're not reading about it in the paper, how are you going to get this information? So in Delaware, we're doing lots of interesting kinds of things through the Community Foundation and through the Local Journalism Initiative. We have an internship program to deepen the pipeline of local news reporters who are people of color and people from other historically underrepresented communities. We've done a local news and information ecosystem assessment to understand what the community's wants and needs are from local news and information. We also convened a collaborative, which is a really interesting pursuit to try to help our newsrooms work more effectively together to get better quality information into more communities. And we're also looking to launch a new nonprofit collaborative newsroom later this year.
Wonderful. Great. Thank you for that overview from all of our panelists. And if there are particular questions or things you want to talk about, we teed up some questions when we met earlier, but we also would like to have this be very interactive. So if there's things you want to know or whatever, just let us know and we'll try to answer those or at least connect you for later conversation. So we talked about all of them involved listening and being involved in what the community wants to hear. Dale, could you talk in a little more depth about how you did that in your community?
Yeah, so we also, went to those night conferences and they were incredibly eye-opening. And out of that, we formed a team of not just actually people in program, people across our foundation. Same thing, did some assessment, went out and talked to focus groups, learned a lot from talking to the community, did a lot of experimentation, started small, figured out who are some of our local, neighborhood news sources, supported them, supported collaboratives of them, brought in Report for America, brought in the Neo-Sojo, Northeast Alliance Solutions Journalism, did all of that, talked to our legacy media, and just started to realize, to be honest, we weren't going to get to the scale that we wanted with the small groups. And the legacy media wasn't interested in changing. I mean, they did what they did well, that's fine. But what we needed to have happen was a little different. And so our biggest experiment has been documenters. We were one of the expansion teams early on out of the group out of Chicago. We launched documenters in March of 2020, not when you would normally launch something new. It turned out to be a blessing because people were home and people wanted to find out what was going on. And so we instantly had like 400 people documenting what was happening at public meetings because now they were all on Zoom.
Could you explain a little bit more what documenters, what that program?
Absolutely, yeah. Documenters is a program that was started out of Chicago, brilliant program that just pays, they're not a news initiative. They paid local residents to document public meetings. That's it. And then they take information from those meetings and they publish some of that information. They do little reports. People get paid something like $15 to $16 an hour. And it really is a way, because since legacy media is no longer really covering those types of meetings, there was nobody covering them. And so this is a way to show that you have people in your community who care about those things, right? The things that come out of those city council meetings and school board hearings, those are important for our daily lives. And it turns out no one was covering them. Documenters has a way to do that. They've now expanded to multiple cities. They're a less expensive way to slowly get into the news business because they're not as expensive. But what they showed us and our board in particular was that we had a level of people in our community who cared a lot about public meetings. If they care about public meetings, think about other things they might care about. So we did that for a couple of years, and then we decided we wanted to go bigger. And so we launched Signal CLE. And Signal, it will be a statewide news source. Right now it's Cleveland, and they just announced Akron a couple of weeks ago. We're very proud of that. We're hoping to get to Columbus and Cincinnati soon. So that's a real intense online news source. We have an editor-in-chief. We have a CEO for the whole state to try to expand to the whole state, because Ohio is about both urban and rural always. So we have to have both of those in our bailiwick. So we're doing a mixture of things. I would say one last thing is that when we launched our online news source Signal, we wanted to make sure from the very beginning that we were engaging community in a way that has not happened in the past before. And so we have former documenters who are now on staff of Signal. We have separate experiments where we're doing little mini documentation in certain neighborhoods so that we can get really detailed information per neighborhood of what's happening. We really have built in community from the very beginning. So when we describe Signal to people, we describe it as both investigative journalism, of course we need that, and community journalism. It's a mixture of both, and no one is more important than the other. So we're very proud of that. We launched in November, and so far so good.
Great. Lisa, tell us more about Civic Lex, talking about community journalism.
Sure. Civic Lex is a small local Lexington nonprofit that is, I think now, maybe 6 years old. And it really is at the intersection of civic engagement and civic media. And much like Dale was discussing, although I will say we do a lot of really positive collaborations with our local legacy media, which is the Lexington Herald Leader, which publishes 6 days a week in print and is digital, obviously all the time. But even there, like Dale was mentioning, what they really didn't have was significant dedicated staff at City Hall. The one thing about Lexington, Kentucky, which is a community of about 320,000 people, is the city and the county is the same. We have a unified government, and so that's worth mentioning. So Civic Lex really came in to fill this space about helping connect residents to their local government, the view being that it's where often people can have the most impact. And really what happens in City Hall is where is also, more accessible for most people and impacts the daily quality of our lives. And so what Civic Lex does is there is actually Civic Lex staff, and they have 5 full-time staff, 2 AmeriCorps and 1 part-time staff person. And what they do is they actually have Civic Lex staff in every meeting at City Hall. So whether that's a city council meeting or a subcommittee or a task force, whatever's happening, they have staff that is covering that. And if you want to see what their work looks like, you can actually go to civiclex.org, and you can even subscribe for free to their weekly, called the Civic Lex Weekly. It hits your inbox every Monday, and literally it takes less than 10 minutes to read. And it's where they're summarizing everything that happened in City Hall the week prior. And it is what is really sort of magical about what they do. It's the way they approach it. Now, they are not investigative journalism, and they are clear about that. Although if they come across something interesting, I will say they regularly collaborate with our daily paper. And so, they're collaborating that way and collaborate on special takeovers and features and other things on the op-ed page, those sorts of things. But what they are doing is really reporting on what is, they are reporting on what's happening in City Hall, and also working in civic education, helping people understand city processes and, how do you connect with your city council member? And if you're interested in serving on a board or commission, how do you do that? And how do you meet with your city council member? And how do you understand the city budget process? They did detailed work around ARPA as well. But the magic, as I was saying, is that what they write in a way, and their Civic Weekly digests are a great example. They really take the complex and make it simple. So it's easy to read, it's digestible, it gives you what you need, and then it always links to more if you want to go deeper. So it really is that combination of civic education and also City Hall reporting. And that is what they do, and they do it exceptionally well. So that is what Civic Lex looks like, and we've been investing in them since the beginning, but really sometimes $25,000 a year. I mean, it's had an outsized impact for the amount of investment we've made, but that's how we work with them.
Great, thank you. And Allison, I know that listening and just the community engagement involvement was a huge part of what you started, how you started, and then continued as you continue to add different segments to the work that you're doing. Can you talk about how you involved the community in shaping what you're doing?
Yeah, one of the first things we wanted to do was make sure that the work we're doing is serving the community needs. I am a former journalist. I'm a former newspaper reporter, and a lot of times, frankly, we're part of the problem, right? Journalists, sometimes we think we know what everybody in the community needs, and we forget to ask. So we made a big point in this case of going to the community. We did a statewide ecosystem assessment and partnered with, I know Delaware really, really well. I had never done a big listening campaign like this before. So we partnered with Fiona Morgan, who's a nationally recognized leader in community listening. And we engaged almost 300 people throughout the state to talk about, and we didn't start with, what newspapers do you read or where do you get your news? We asked people, where do you find out what's going on and where do you find out what you need to know and what do you need to know more about? We had focus groups. We did a statewide text messaging survey to get into a really randomized population. And we did a lot of in-depth one-on-one interviews. So we really wanted to find out what people felt like they were already getting good information about and what they were not getting good stuff about and what were their concerns about the local news and information that they were getting. Of course, we also asked a lot of questions about representation and nuanced coverage of different communities and particularly underserved communities, historically underserved and underrepresented communities. It's also really important to me that when we think about underrepresented communities, we also think about diverse political ideology. It is really important that we are covering some of the communities that are historically underserved in the terms of racial, low income, other demographic groups that are historically underserved. But we also need to be looking at Delaware is a pretty darn left-leaning state. So sometimes there are conservative voices that are not as elevated, that don't get the attention that, personal politics aside, we need to, in a democracy, be hearing from people with different beliefs, even if they're beliefs that we disagree with. And an important part of doing that, not only do we get to better ideas, better community solutions by hearing from more people, we also build trust. We build trust in institutions. We overcome some of that tribalism and polarization, and we start to understand one another better, even if we don't always agree. That helps us to build that understanding. So by trying to engage lots of different people from lots of different communities and really be listening, that helped us to then strategically identify, okay, where are the gaps in Delaware? And we ended up identifying both geographic gaps. Some of you may have heard the terms a news desert or ghost newsrooms. This is communities where they just don't have the coverage and the access to information that they need. So we identified geographic gaps where we need better information. We also identified demographic communities, looking at racial communities, LGBTQ, and also quite a lot of white rural communities and rural communities in general, including rural communities of color that are not getting access that they need. And then we also identified a series of issue areas where people particularly want and need more information in Delaware. And I think this aligns with a lot of communities. We need better information about government accountability. We just have very little public scrutiny over our public sector right now in Delaware. And folks are really asking for that. And they're also asking for better information about education, which is not a surprise. And we also need better information about land use decisions and the environmental and infrastructure impact of those kinds of things. So obviously every community is going to have different gaps, but it really helped us to say, okay, we have now done actual research, which then helped us go to our funding community and say, we have actual data that backs up these strategies that we're proposing and shows us how we can start to address those gaps and those needs in the community.
Great, thank you. And as you can tell, there are so many ways that just these three community foundations are interacting with news. It's a lot, it's broad, it's deep, and it's with multiple organizations. We had a question, is it general support? Are you offering general support, or are you doing sponsored content like funding a health reporter, or we did an experiment where we funded an education reporter. So talk a little bit about how you're directing the funding. Is it overall? Is it both? Just talk about how you're thinking about where that funding goes.
I'll start. We've kind of done a both and. First of all, we gave multi-year funding because it needs a minute to start this up. Second is we did a mixture of some of our general funds, unrestricted funds, but then we also have a lot of restricted funds. And so we found funds that could match some of the beats. So we found some, dollars that would support economic development, that would support, we figured out a way to combine all those funds to get the dollars that the entity needed to start up. We also, by the way, are a collaborative. We are not the only funder in this space. We are working diligently with a number of other funders, St. Luke's Foundation, Fowler's, and people are coming on to support different things. So somebody wants to support the environmental beat, you can support that, right? We have individual donors. We have an individual donor who helped us, who loved documenters. And when he saw that we were going to embed documenters within Signal, he said, I'm here and I'm going to increase my donation because I think this is a wonderful opportunity. So no stone is unturned. I will just say that. And we consider this to be a collaborative going forward with not just us at the table.
And I know many of us have varying levels of unrestricted funds that we can assess. When you said you found money, was that through fund holders with your foundation?
Yeah. We have a number of funds that, they're very restricted, right? For certain types of things. And so we found ways to match that funding with what some of the reporters were going to write on. So some of the reporters write on poverty and government. We have restricted funds specifically for that. And so we targeted those funds. And so it's not really general operating because we have to have a reporter who's reporting on those things in order to match what that donor gave money for.
Okay. Lisa, how do you weigh that general operating versus specific report or specific funding?
So Shelly, we've done both, and obviously we all know that unrestricted support is incredibly critical. And so in the instance of Civic Lex, that has been general operating support, and we've done that for, as I said, for 6 years. On the other hand, I think another really simple entry point is Report for America. And so for those who may not know, it's a little bit like Teach for America. They place top college graduating journalism students, journalism graduates, and they place them in newspapers around the country. And so we have, there is a match requirement. So Report for America has money where they're essentially, at least in the first year, sponsoring half of that college graduate salary, but there needs to be a local match as well. And so for 3 different reporters, we've provided varying degrees of that match money. And we've been able to do that. For instance, we had a real interest, and this was during the pandemic, in expanded health coverage. And so they actually were hiring a Report for America health-focused reporter that was going to be covering both Central Kentucky, where we are, but also Appalachia, Kentucky, where there's also a chunk of Appalachia that we serve. So it just really aligned with our geography, and during the pandemic, this critical need for health information. And so we funded that match for 2 years, and then ultimately the Herald Leader was able to hire that reporter full time. It was a big win, and the reporting during the pandemic was absolutely excellent. But those are relatively affordable investments. So whereas to start a nonprofit newsroom, and Shelly, you probably should talk about what the Wichita Community Foundation does. I mean, you can make really very large unrestricted investments like you all did to start an entirely new entity, or, it's a much lower dollar to partner with something like Report for America. And then we even have a hybrid. We have something at the Community Foundation called the Bluegrass Civic Journalism Fund, and it actually supports joint and collaborative projects between Civic Lex and our daily paper, the Herald Leader. And there is external money, there is individual donor money. For those of you who still do a giving challenge, like we do, an online giving challenge, money from that giving challenge goes into the Bluegrass Civic Journalism Fund. They participate in our Good Giving Challenge. So there's a lot of different ways to approach this, and I think at a lot of different price points. But I do think, Shelly, you should talk about what you're doing in Wichita.
Well, so we have partnered with the American Journalism Project and several other funders, and we're helping stand up the Wichita and Kansas City Beacons. And when I'm not talking, I'll put the link on there. And so it was the largest unrestricted grant that we had ever made, but there's a lot of other funding. And the American Journalism Project is working in Cleveland and other cities across the country to really, it's a venture capitalist who believes so strongly in this. He's putting large philanthropic dollars in those places as well. So there's been some interesting questions about the idea, and this was a huge topic of conversation a couple of weeks ago in Miami at the Knight Media Forum, and we can talk a lot about the Knight Foundation and the support that they've provided. But is this an and or we support the legacy news or the print, what we think of as old-time journalism, old-fashioned journalism, whatever you want to call it? Can we support them in a way and support nonprofit news? Does it have to be one or the other? And is there a way to manage that? Allison, have you seen those kinds of partnerships, or has it become strictly focusing on the nonprofit? And then part two of that is the sustainability of these organizations. Is this going to be ongoing funding? And obviously it is just like any other nonprofit, but do you see that a community foundation is sunk in a little deeper for a longer term, and as Lisa said, the unrestricted funding, or I'm sorry, that was Dale.
Yeah, I'd love to start with that either or question. I think absolutely not. It's an either or. And frankly, I think we should be doing all. We have the opportunity. What we're doing in Delaware is actually kind of a hybrid. I am working on starting a nonprofit newsroom, but it's going to be a nonprofit collaborative newsroom that is going to actually partner with all of the existing legacy newsrooms, including print, broadcast, online only. So it's going to do a lot of different things. And my goal is actually to lift all boats. As much as I hate that hokey expression, we want to try to fill some of these gaps in information needs throughout the state, and to help our existing newsrooms better serve their communities, because I am never going to be able to get all of Delaware to consume news and information from a single nonprofit news entity, right? That is not going to happen. People consume news and information from different resources in different languages on different platforms. So we are looking at how do we create good, high quality, trustworthy, credible content that can then be distributed to the existing newsrooms that they can then serve to their audiences. Our goal is to get more good quality information into more communities so that people can put that local news and information to work. If the news that we produce through our new nonprofit news entity is consumed on spotlightdelaware.org, on our new nonprofit site, that's great. But if the local Gannett paper picks it up and somebody reads the story on that Gannett paper, and Gannett gets a new subscriber because of that article, that's a huge win for us too, because we are trying to engage more people, right? We're trying to get people to participate in their communities and to have the information to help them access the resources that they need. So I think that this is absolutely, and frankly, in most of our communities, if we lost not most necessarily, but in many of our communities, we need both. If we lose the for-profit media outlets that we have, that doesn't help anybody. Just supplementing with a nonprofit newsroom, I think, can be really powerful and helpful in some communities, but it's not going to be a silver bullet. We've got to be serving more people through more audiences. So absolutely, we should be trying to help more audiences through more platforms. And I'm sorry, you asked the second part of that.
Well, I think just about the idea of how do we find sustainability in these, the
sustainability
for nonprofits everywhere.
Yeah, it is. And I don't think we are ever, part of my goal is to shift the way we think about local news and information. As funders, I want us to start thinking about this as a public good. Local news and information is not sexy enough to be completely 100% self-sustaining in a capitalistic society any more than the Delaware Art Museum or, the Nebraska Cultural Center is going to survive on its own based purely on ticket sales, right? That just doesn't work. But what we can do, and the models that we're looking at in Delaware, is if we can get to about a 60-40% split of revenue earned versus philanthropic revenue, then that gets us on par with most arts organizations. Most arts organizations are aiming for about a 60-40 split. And by going through models like membership, corporate underwriting, taking lessons from National Public Radio's models, and building on those, we can get to a sustainable model with that kind of level of investment. There has got to be some kind of ongoing level of investment. We need local news and information just as much as we need access to, local ballet companies, local theater companies, etc.
Dale, how do you think about sustainability?
I think similarly, we're trying to get to a mix. I like the term, you're seeing it as a public good. We have major cultural institutions that we all support and we will all be supporting for forever. I think local news fits into that same category. It's equally important. And we've just got to figure out a way to everybody pay a little bit so that nobody has to pay a lot. I will just say on the first, and so we've definitely positioned this to our board and they agree that this is long-term funding over multiple years, working with partners, and we know partners come and go, we understand that. But when you can give, please give, and give at any level, right? We're doing all sorts of membership campaigns, join as a $5 member. I mean, we'll take all of it. And I agree also that it's not an either or, you need all of it. Remember 100 years ago, we used to have like 50 newspapers sometimes in an area. We now have 2. We can go back to 4. It's okay. Because people do consume their news in different ways. And so my sports people, they're going to go to the legacy newspaper because they cover it in ways that nobody else will, right? And everybody wants that. I go Cavs. But, some of the other people, they want it in a different way. And they want stories told that, to be honest, the larger newspapers just are not going to tell. They just don't see it as part of their business to do so.
Yeah.
So we even, I forgot to mention, we have a second nonprofit news initiative that's launched here through another one of our foundations. We also now fund, but they brought it here, the Gun Foundation, the Marshall Project, very specifically focused on public safety and criminal justice reform. At first, we launched in the same year, and we were told by a number of people, why are you doing that? You can only have one at a time. And I'm like, why? That criminal justice work is its own body of work and is necessary, right? They are doing incredible work. We now share a reporter between us. We're sharing projects. They even think about news not the way we used to consume it, right? Just in this newspaper in one way. I was at a youth bindover seminar that they had for 300 members who could go to different churches so that we can deal with a huge youth bindover issue that we have here in our county. And what the 2 newspapers did through that one reporter was they took a really complicated issue, they put it into a schematic that was like a page and a half, so that they could share out with the community. And they took their knowledge and broke it down in a way that other people could understand it. That's another way of getting news, right?
Absolutely.
Equally important, because every one of those people now understands youth bindover is going to vote against it.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying it's amazing what's happening out of these experiments that I think are going to be life-changing.
So let's go down the tactical path of, as we were starting this work in Wichita and Kansas, we had a lot of discussions with our board about just because we're a funder doesn't mean we're controlling content. In fact, there's a very, very hard line. My training as a journalist as well. Did you get pushback from the board? Are there community members who are saying, what gives you the right to do this? And how do you talk about that difference between funding something and the content that comes out the other end? And to anybody who has any of our panelists with good answers there.
I think that is, we talked about this in some of our previous conversations, that I think that is a shared 2-way education process. As funders, we have to learn what journalists' expectations and needs and ethical parameters are. And the journalists also have to understand and learn more about what we expect and require and need as funders, because it's not malicious. It's not trying to be, contrary or anything necessarily. It's just that we haven't done very much of this yet, right? The reporters aren't used to being funded philanthropically yet. It's a culture shift, and we're not necessarily used to funding what has historically been a for-profit business model. So we're all learning from each other, but we do have to learn ourselves, and then also help our board members and our donors and our staff members to understand, no, we do not get to preview the article. And no, we do not get to change the quotes because we don't like the way we sounded. No, we don't get to say, we're going to give you this money if you agree to talk to X, Y, and Z person or present A, B, and C position. We are giving money to support this work. And then we have to have an editorial wall there. And the same goes with helping the editors and reporters understand that if we provide funding to cover a specific community or to cover a specific issue, we're not going to try to necessarily control the content or the coverage, but they do have to adhere to those basic parameters. We have an internship program in Delaware where the stipulation was that we would fund an intern, not trying to alter the nature of the coverage, but the point of the intern was to cover the impact of the pandemic on communities of color in a particular geographic area. And the newsroom that one of the newsrooms we had agreed to work with, signed on to this, and then at the last minute said, that doesn't really work for our readership. So we're just going to have them, cover the parades or whatever it was. And we had to say, no, that's just not how that works. It has to be within the parameters of the grant. And ultimately, we ended up having to withdraw the funding because the newsroom did not want to honor the parameters of the grant. And we, as the money was given for pandemic grant response programs. So we couldn't bend on that either. Now we had another 3 newsrooms who participated in that program, and it worked beautifully because they did understand the process. But I think we're just going to have to learn as we kind of make this culture shift kind of in how we treat news and information.
Lisa, have you had people telling you you're getting out of your lane as a community foundation?
We've not experienced that. And I think it's really what Allison said. It's about having, like anything else we do, I think it's very relational. So it's having strong relationships, it's having clear communication, to communicate, in many different ways. And we have not thankfully encountered those problems to this point. But I think we've done a lot of groundwork on the front end and tried to communicate really clearly and have really worked to build strong relationships and partnerships.
Okay. And Dale, any thoughts about that?
Ditto what Allison said, hard wall, and we have to learn each other's spaces. And I think we're doing that. We haven't had a specific issue yet. Not sure, I'm not saying we won't, but we do have to, we've had in particular conversations on the board of Signal, who have to manage this across the state of, when funders come to them, what do they say, and things like that. So it's almost like we've practiced, but we haven't had to put it into practice yet. Okay.
We had a question about what we're doing to help student journalists and to help build the pipeline of future journalists, because I know many people have said, they saw it as a dying field. And so there was a real dearth of people to be there. And in Wichita, through the Journalism Collaborative, which we've also been involved with, one of our partners was actually the local journalism school at Wichita State. So have you worked at the student, whether high school, college level, to help build that pipeline of journalists and do that training?
We've been partnering with the school district.
Okay.
They've revitalized their journalism work and their clubs and programs, and we've been working with them. The other thing for us is documenters. You can be a documenter starting at 16.
Oh, okay.
And so it turns out that some of those young documenters, one of them is one of the people we actually hired for Signal when they turned 21.
And with the school district, is that at the high school level, Dale?
Yes, high school level.
Okay. And Lisa, I think you started to say something. Oh, okay.
Oh, sorry, I think that was me. I'm sorry.
Okay, sorry.
I got excited and
That's good. Go for it.
I see Jessica just dropped the link to our program in the chat there. We do have an internship program for college students, and we actually just applied for as the local journalism initiative, not as the community foundation. We just applied. We were actually asked by our U.S. Senator to apply for federal funding to create a high school program. One of the challenges we are finding with our college internship program is that a lot of the students we're not getting a ton of applicants, and the intern applicants we do get are not always as ready to hit the ground running as the newsrooms really need. And we're trying some different strategies to support that. And I'll, happy to keep you posted as it improves, but it is something we're trying to do. And a lot of that, I think, will be ultimately within local news and information. It's really a civic engagement issue when we try to talk about addressing the consumer side problem of local news and information, right? We can throw supply, we can throw lots of local news and information at people, but if nobody is consuming it, I don't read a physical newspaper anymore. I'm hard pressed to skim the New York Times online every morning. And it's what I care about. So as a community, how do we build up how do we get folks to internalize the importance of being informed about community and being engaged in the community? And that does, I think, go, I struggle with how far back does it go, right? Is high school going to be far enough back? But yeah, so we're trying to create some, and I tell my personal story. I have a 21-year-old son who, knows that I work on this issue. And he kind of came into my kitchen the other day where I was working, and he said, Mom, it's really stressing me out that you're working on this journalism stuff, because I just don't think there's a place for journalism in America anymore. And of course, my jaw hit the floor, of course, but we talked about it, but it was kind of a reminder to me of the importance of helping particularly young people understand the role of the fourth estate, the role of journalism in providing that oversight and the information that we need to engage to function as a democracy. So we definitely have a lot of work to do in that arena.
So have any of you that we have a question about a shared position with the community foundation and a local nonprofit news outlet? And with the acknowledgement that there could be some tactics and things to work out. Have any of you seen that kind of partnership with a small community foundation and a small local news?
I would
go ahead.
I'm sorry, Dale. I think you're going to say the same thing I am. I'd be very nervous about that not becoming being treated as a PR position. If you are willing to fund it and let the editors and the reporters determine what they're going to cover, I see no issue with it. But if you're going to be telling them what you think they need to be covering and how they need to be covering it, I would have more concerns about it from an editorial wall standpoint.
Yeah, I would say we have a partnership also with our local public radios endeavor. TV, state radio, all of it. And we've given them dollars out of restricted funds for years now to do like health reporting and some other things. And they've been fantastic, by the way. And in the pandemic, they were awesome. And we continue to do that. It's a both and for us. I do believe that many people in legacy media see the need for these types of stories. The question is how to do it. And the question is who determines which story. Mm-hmm. So if you've got the inclination in legacy media to do this, and you hire a reporter and you give them free reign and you talk to the community, you can come up with really good stories. You can. It's just that the revenue model doesn't always sometimes dictates that you won't do that. But I do believe we have legacy media who totally tries to do this within the parameters that they are operating in. And I think you could probably do it through a small group. I do think it takes what I have learned is it takes lots of over communication, almost lots of communication on what are the expectations. What do you mean by journalism? What do I mean by journalism? What targeted group are you trying to get to? What targeted group do I see? Because we've talked to them, have never been seen in your paper and now need to be seen in that paper. And that requires, to be honest, everybody doing a little bit something different. It's not about you bringing all that you have done for the last 20 years and sticking with that. It is about, we need a different form of journalism or an additional form. And how do you incorporate that additional form and those targets in what you're currently doing? It's not that you can't do that. It's just, to be honest, and we know this from nonprofits, it's easier to start new than to reform. That's the same thing with the journalists. It's just easier to start new because you got to unlearn things. I'm not saying you can't, but I'm just saying you got to have lots of conversation if you're going to do it.
Yeah. So another question about the idea of, would you consider opening a fund if a news outlet wanted to open a fund with you, and they would do their fundraising and everything, and to be
Why not? You do that for everybody else.
Yeah.
I think a lot of folks are doing that. There's a whole cohort of us doing what's called a community news fund. Yeah, it's very, very common now. And we're actually finding donors who are interested in supporting this because people are starting to understand local news and information. In fact, there's kind of a new buzzword floating around. Some folks are trying out civic information instead of journalism. I'm not totally sold on it yet, but this idea that journalism has a little bit of baggage to it, kind of as a term, but we all kind of get it, that we need information to be able to function in a civil society.
And Shelly, that's exactly what our Bluegrass Civic Journalism Fund is at the Community Foundation. And again, what maybe is a little bit different, it's a joint fund of our legacy newspaper and of Civic Lex, and it funds projects they work on jointly, but that's exactly what it is.
So as you
Colorado is doing great work on that area too.
They are, absolutely, yeah. And I know they have some environmental focused funds and some different things. As we think about how we continue to support this, I know the Beacon is doing all sorts of things and different things that I've learned around Billy Penn that was in Pennsylvania. The idea of earned revenue besides membership. Have you seen things in your organizations or in the organizations you support that have earned revenue in ways other than the membership model and just fun and philanthropy?
I think that's going to depend on the community. For some reason in Delaware, people love black tie events. So we're going to probably try something like that. There's a lot of support for events, and some of you may have heard about things like, I think it's actually Dale probably knows better, Trib Fest. There are like local news organizations that are running kind of public policy community conversations, and you can get corporate sponsorship underwriting for those types of things. So I think that events will be an important stream for us. And that also, again, aligns so beautifully with what we're trying to do, because the point is not just to generate the information, but then to engage people with the information and to help them understand how can they act on it? How can they influence public policy and drive the change they want to change so we have better communities? So that those events around civic engagement, I think, are going to be critical.
We're planning on those too. We want to help people consume the news. And so, and it's another way of bringing what I think Allison talked about early. One of the goals was social cohesion and social connection. This is a way to do that.
Yes.
And hopefully with people who are different, right?
Yes,
That's
right.
We're not there
Right.
yet in Delaware, but
Yeah.
my hope is that when we have these public
Yeah.
policy conversations, it won't just be the usual suspects who show up and talk about the same thing. I'll talk about my son again. He's at the University of Delaware, and one of his great frustrations is that in the public policy classes, the discussions are not robust because everybody just agrees. And it's so frustrating to him. He's like, where are the people with different ideas? Where are the people who are going to argue with me so I can learn to think? And we're not doing that as a society.
And I think there's a real mesh of what is new journalism, what is legacy journalism, or old news, or however you define that. And we hope that the Beacon will experiment with the idea of sending text messaging news. I get all my ads from World Market or whatever that come to me, and so all these varied ways. So your son will be engaged in that. So it's it's on TikTok or Instagram or whatever is the evolving media front will be what that is. One of our absolute strongest partners in the collaborative in Wichita is he would absolutely fit the definition of a legacy journalist. He was at the newspaper, the printed newspaper, for many years. He's now shifted over to our public radio station and is the general manager there, doing fantastic work, but is all in on this collaborative and learning how to do things. And so he has that great institutional knowledge, but he's seen that need to evolve and move forward with there. So we're getting close to time. We're getting ready to wrap up. And I guess everybody on the call and even our three guests have varying degrees of involvement and really commitment into this and what they're doing. For our three panelists, give your high-level quick thought about what you wish you would have done earlier. How can we encourage the rest of these folks to dive into this work?
Well, there was a question somebody asked earlier about, funding general operations versus content, sponsored content. And I'd love to encourage folks to think about, you don't have to fund a newsroom or a reporter. There are lots of different ways to fund local news and information that doesn't necessarily mean, paying for a reporter or content. And that, I think, is something that honestly held me back for several years, because that's kind of trying to build a mountain. And I'm trying to encourage people, start with the pile of sand, start with a small internship program, or, start with some kind of a small partnership, but just start kind of dipping your toe in so that you can sort of understand. And also, somebody had made the point about we don't all have a lot of discretionary resources, and you don't have to. You can start small and start to kind of learn about what's going on and what the possibilities are.
And I think also we can remember our role as community foundations as conveners and supporters, that it doesn't, obviously it's great if there's money to get involved with, but it also can be many other ways to open doors for people and convene groups and those sorts of things. So Dale, what is your thought about how you approach this and your quick just reference point?
There are multiple avenues in. I think the first thing is just confirm it's what you think your community foundation wants to do. Find the community of the willing. That's your donors, that's some of your staff, that's outside partners, and then figure out at whatever level you can invest, how to start. You can start with one reporter at a place that's willing to make some changes. You can start with student journalism. One of the best things that's happening in Ohio right now is Intel is coming. There's no newspaper where Intel is, nothing. An individual donor has given money to, I think, a group of college students to do reporting on Intel. It's fabulous. It doesn't cost that much money. It's going to be amazing. We're going to try to partner with them, by the way. I'm just saying there's many ways to start, but they found a niche. They found a group of people who agreed that there was a problem. And then you figure out multiple bites at that apple. So I would just say, just get in and think about it. Don't stop. Because if we're not in, our job is to lift up problems for the community, listen to the community, and respond. This is an incredible response to what we know is an absolute need in multiple hundreds of communities. Yeah. So don't say that there's no room for you. It's just a matter of how, not when.
Great. Lisa?
Shelly, I'd echo what Allison and Dale said, and that you absolutely can start small. And maybe the other thought is to start somewhere that really aligns with the things your community foundation is already focused on. So for instance, one thing, this was a few years ago, that our daily paper had stopped was the last arts and culture reporter was gone. So it was really hurting nonprofits that did, performances or plays or, dance, whatever it was. There was no one writing about their upcoming performances. There was nobody reviewing their performances. And it was really low dollar for us to fund an arts and culture freelance pool for our daily paper. No, we didn't dictate, what organizations were being covered or reviewed and those sorts of things. But I'm just saying arts and culture was something easy for folks to understand. It could be whatever size. And it made a real difference that these kind of articles and reviews started again. So I guess, start where you are and start small, and also don't be afraid to be creative.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again to all of you for joining us, and thanks to Lisa and Allison and Dale for sharing their wisdom and experience with us. And then also thank you to Melissa for making this all work, and to the Council on Foundations and to CEONet. Please continue to follow these conversations on the Philanthropy Exchange. If you have questions or topics for consideration, please send them to Melissa Nolan or to Christy Naus in the Des Moines Community Foundation, who has really been instrumental in leading all of this. And of course, that we hope we get to see you all in person at Leading Locally 2023. That will be June 13 and 14 in Denver. So it's a great time of the year to go to Colorado. There are still tickets left for general registrations. If you have any questions on that, reach out to those folks that I mentioned before. And again, thank you for caring about your communities and for all the great work that you do. Everybody have a fantastic day.
Thank you.